My name is Paloma Lopez, and I'm an educator with the Indian Arts Center at the School for Advanced Research. Thank you all for joining us today. Conversation and Pottery Making is the second of 4 events in this year's Native Arts Speaker Series, Grounded in Clay Conversations. I would like to begin today by acknowledging that we are gathered on Tewa lands and surrounded by the traditional lands of Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo communities. The topics discussed throughout this series, as well as the exhibition from which it is derived, examine vital connections between Pueblo people, land, and pottery. I would like to thank MIAC for hosting this year's series and everybody here and at SAR who has had a hand in planning, organizing, and promoting all of our events. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce today's speakers. Samuel Villarreal Catanach is from the Pueblo of Pojoaque. He is a father, learner, and teacher. Samuel earned a Master of Science in American Indian Studies from Arizona State University and has interned with the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, Crow Canyon Archaeological Center, Where Are Your Keys, a language revitalization organization, and SAR's Indian Arts Research Center. In 2018, Samuel was an inaugural Indigenous Digital Archive Fellow, and since 2020 has served on the board of the Santa Fe Indigenous Center. His current role is that of inaugural director of the Pueblo of Pojoaque Tewa Language Department. Welcome, Samuel. And Clarence Cruz is an elder, former elected tribal war chief, and traditional potter and educator from Ohkay Owingeh. He is also an award-winning artist and tenure-track professor at the University of New Mexico, UNM. Clarence has devoted his life to learning and understanding the past and present significance of Pueblo pottery. As a traditional Pueblo potter, he gathers and processes all raw materials and hand-builds each pot and fires them outdoors. In 2012, Clarence was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Allen Hauser Legacy Award, and in 2020, he was a recipient of a Luce Indigenous Knowledge Fellowship. Welcome, Clarence. And now I'll hand things over. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Now? Okay. Maybe I should turn it off. Well, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to be here. Singi tiiri mama.
Oh, ma, we are again the one. Good.
Yeah, so I've known, as was just mentioned, I'm from the Pueblo Pojoaque, or as we call it in our Tewa language, Ohkay Owingeh. I've had the privilege of knowing Clarence here for, I would say, probably a little more than a decade now. I got to know Clarence through classes at the Po Cultural Center in Pojoaque. I took Micaceous Pottery with Clarence, and I think that was probably one of the first classes in pottery, traditional pottery making, that I was able to have the privilege of going through with him. And we've been in touch over the years for various things, more recently, a little bit more frequently, which has been nice. And I consider Clarence to be, one of the handful of traditional people who I consider mentors to me in some capacity. And every time I have the opportunity to work with Clarence, I take it upon myself to take advantage of that, because I know I'm going to gain something from it that will be useful for me in my own journey as a Posumwaging, as a Tewa, as a Native person, in figuring out who I am, who I want to be, and what I would like my role to be in my community and my family and otherwise. Also, as was mentioned, I direct the Tewa Language Department at Ohkay Owingeh at the Pueblo Pojoaque, but I am a second language learner of our language. I grew up with it around, but not necessarily speaking it, and it was probably within the last decade that started to change for various reasons. But working with Clarence I'm able to get those various aspects of what it was like for him growing up and seeing the tangible of pottery coming together with the intangible of language. And so, our relationship is one in which I feel that I'm able to provide various assistance to him, whether that be for making this film that I'll let him mention, or anything else that he needs. And I know I'm going to get some kind of insight from him as an elder, as a potter, as another Tewa person.
Again, welcome to the event here. And I'd like to thank Mike as well as all his staff, as well as those from the SAR area, to thank them all for making such an event happen. It's always a journey for everyone, not just the potters, the artists in many different mediums, but also for all of you that are out there. You're also always on a journey trying to get from A to B, trying to take care of things, family, life itself, that's art, in itself, if you don't see it that way, but it's art. Trying to make things happen and solve things and be creative in another way that you get a better outcome from the very beginning. I am from Ohkay Owingeh. I do come from a big family, a family of 10, 7 brothers, 3 sisters. We lost our dad when I was like about 15. Lost my mom, it'll be 2.5 years now. Lost her on Thanksgiving Day. It was okay, good memories, just like everyone else, good thoughts, whatnot. And I teach at the University of New Mexico. For the longest time, I was the only native instructor there, adjunct 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in the art department until just very recently, about 5 years ago. And now more native historians are being brought into the department, which is great. It's good to see. But I've been at UNM for about maybe 24 years and almost there and ready to retire, I think, But, it's been a great journey, whether it was in the academia world, but also within the Tewa world, as well as Kiwa world, and southern, northern, east, west, working with various students, having them learn the technique of Pueblo pottery as well. But, sharing my skills and techniques in building and gathering and processing, but also allowing them to freely build their style within their own tradition from where they come from. Pottery has a language within itself. Symbolism also is on there. It tells a story. There is a story on the pot. It's a storybook, basically. It's just like the regalia that we wear when we dance. The designs aren't just for being pretty and decorative. They have a meaning. They tell a story. It's just like I was mentioning to Samuel, the petroglyphs, when you take a walk through there, it's a storybook of events of what have happened through the travels of all our ancestors, or those that were traveling through that same spot, seeing what was happening during the day or night, but also recording. It's a history of the past, and those that come through leave another picture or drawing as to what they encountered, whether it's in the day or night or above, what was happening up in the cosmos that was being recorded, just like on pottery too. It's being recorded in designs in many ways, but then they also have a Tewa name, which reverts back to what we're going to be discussing. How does that relate to pottery language, to pottery, hua, ing, the tools, the gourds, the water bowl, fa, song, that make the pots become matured, meaning baked, all the elements are present within what we do. We are all but the elements itself. You know, a pot holds something, it's functional, it has a purpose, and so are we. We're a pot. We have a purpose, we have a function. So, as we go through and going back and forth as we're talking, you'll hear different words, describing maybe what I'm doing or why I'm doing something, and we'll just carry on a conversation back and forth. And then at the end, we should have a Q&A. Is that what you were thinking? Yeah. So, go ahead, start it off. We'll get going,
Yeah, I think you mentioning that the pots are a form of storytelling is a good way to connect what I was talking about, the tangible with the intangible, because from my experience within my community, there's a heavy emphasis on revitalization of traditional art, which is a very good thing. And now we're trying to get language to have that same momentum, because it's a lot easier for somebody to appreciate something that they can hold and see and possibly purchase and own and that type of thing. And there's a process through which you go through to learn that skill set, and then you're able to do it, and it gives you the ability to connect with the art form as well as the people who pass that skill set down for generations. The language, on the other hand, is a little bit different in that you can't see it, you can't put it up somewhere and look at it and it looks nice. You can't appreciate it in the same way necessarily. It's a living thing that has to be produced by the person. And our languages are not written. And so it's difficult to have them have the same meaning a lot of time, especially when we're thinking through a Western lens. But as our ancestors know, as our elders know, and as I'm trying to learn, and as our youth are trying to grasp onto as well, is that our language is very much at the foundation of who we are as indigenous people, especially as people from this land right here. Pueblo people have been here for a very long time, and so I can't help but think that the land and the language are intertwined, because over time they inform one another. And as our people have been here, they've been able to establish this very deep-rooted relationship with the land and have their words reflect that relationship of reciprocity, of respect, of balance. And as we can see with environmental degradation, that the world as a whole has lost that connection. And if we don't keep our languages not only intact, but strengthen them and ensure that they continue, we will also start to lose that worldview of how we live on this earth and how we respect this earth and see the earth. We don't consider it just a piece of land. We consider it our mother, and we consider it to be a relative that cares for us and that we are responsible for caring for in return. And so when we learn our language, that helps us to do several things. It helps us to connect to our ancestors, it connects to the land, but it also in a world that's very much at times in chaos, especially for Native people, Native youth in particular, who are trying to find their way through life, and they're being sent all of these messages of who they should be and what's important. If they have their indigenous identity and they have mentors and they have their language, they have access to their language, they have access to the arts, they have access to their traditions, and they're able to partake in those things, it gives them a direction to head toward. And when those things come in their lives, those challenges and those moments of questioning who they are, it'll keep them grounded. And I know that because that's the way I've been making my way through life, and I'm still making my way through life. And so the language for me isn't just something that's interesting, it's very much a key part of, ensuring that I live a fulfilling and meaningful life and that I keep my sanity, and wanting to pass those things on to our community, but also my son and the rest of my family, because it's very key to mental health and a bunch of other things. And so when I hear Matma talk about a pot being a way of storytelling, I really do see that, because when we look at pots and the various symbols there, it's telling a story of what's important to the maker of that pot, to the culture they come from. And just like the pot, the regalia has symbolism of the land. If you look at anything that Pueblo people do that comes from the tradition, it's always back to the land, all the time. All of the Tewa Pueblos are named after the land. They're not named after people. They're always in reference to what is important about that piece of area. Our names, our Tewa names, are almost always a reflection of the land. And so the land is very much a key piece of how we think about who we are in this world. And I'll let Matma add to that or give any thoughts on what you think.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Samuel. I think, again, to the key to retaining native traditions and cultures is within the language itself, learning how to speak your language and understand what that word means and what certain areas that we relate to traditionally, and how we worship certain areas and what they are called. We don't have boundaries. We don't have fences. But we all know our boundaries. But we do always worship those sacred areas as well. We cross over, just like language itself. Tewa people. There's 6 Tewa pueblos that speak Tewa. Tesuki, Pojoaque, Nambe, San Alfonso, Santa Clara, and Ohkay Owingeh. Although Taos and Picaris are part of the 8 northern pueblos, they speak a different dialect. And as you go further south, there's 4 different groups and 2 different groups that speak their own language. But their similarities, traditions and customs are similar in one way or another. But as you go down south, you always hear some of our Tewa words mentioned in their songs also, if you listen carefully. Same thing with the Hopis, the same thing. We do have our relatives up there also, Tewa Hopis that come from up here north, and they always come to visit the certain areas within our village. But it seemed like our house in the village at one point was the hub for a lot of the Hopi folks. They would come and visit there and talk to people, and then from there they would move on. But similarities in language, but you have to be careful on how you pronounce the word, because there's many words that are pronounced the same but have different meanings. Path, moon, water, it's and like if I was at Hopi they say "Obihuia," that means sit down and eat. For the northern Pueblo, it means tear yourself up. Okay. Oh, okay, all right, yeah. But so it's where you enunciate, where you put the enunciation on the word itself. So it may have many meanings, but you just have to be a little careful. Just like going to another country, not knowing the language, you try to speak it and then you're in trouble, right? But yeah, getting back to the language itself, without language and connection to place and space within a community, let alone the land itself, you have that loss of being in place. So if we lose that, we lose sovereignty as well. And we'll all be out there like everybody else trying to figure out where do you belong? What is yours? But within the Tewa world and native world, we don't own anything. It's not ours. We're borrowing a space for a time. It's not ownership. It's the same thing with what we do. We're only borrowing pinkwheel with me as a potter to create something, a beauty, which she is. Giving her a form and a shape and life. Same thing with words. As you speak it, you give it the breath of life and a meaning and a function and a purpose within a place, within a space. There's many words that we as Tewa people use outside of the sacred realm of a setting within a kiva versus the community. That respect of the word that's being used for a particular purpose within a place, within a space. Just like pottery has a function, a particular function within a community, and will always have a place and a function within that space. Just like us, words do also have that same function. So as we move forward, we hope that the next generation is moving forward with tradition, culture, and language. It is our generation to make that happen, just like our ancestors before us and their ancestors before them. To keep it moving forward. If we don't do that, it's going to be lost, and we'll be trying to figure out the language itself. But as for museums, I'm glad some of our pieces are there, artifacts and whatnot, because we don't have a museum to house our own ancestral work. But we can go visit. We can go talk to them. Until that day comes that we have a place for our own, then so be it. And that's what we like to let our younger generation know. The museums are there. Go look and see what your people did, your grandma, your aunties. You might find them in there. And learning to see what was being done 100, 200 years, 500 years ago. Bring that to the forefront. They're never dead. They're never gone. It's always alive. It's always alive. Give it a new meaning. Bring it, as we would say, bring it into the light of day. Let it breathe again. But we have to give it breath. Language is like that too. It's giving it a new breath of life and a continuum, in the hopes that we do not lose our language itself. And I'm glad what Samuel and a lot of the native Tewa speakers are doing, making sure that it is ongoing and it is taught in the house or outside. Sometimes, like the older generation, those that were displaced and sent into the city, relocation, they had the hardest time and not learning how to speak or being told not to speak, just like a lot of the boarding schools as well, where you couldn't speak that language, but some of them that want their kids to learn the language because of what they went through. So it wasn't their fault. It wasn't their fault. But a lot of them are that have returned back, like I had. I had that play out at the Poe Center when I was there. I had a lot of folks that were returning back to the Pueblo from the city after they retired. They were taking the pottery classes, the embroidery classes, any native art that was being taught at Poe, and not only wanting to learn the art, but the language. I had a lot of conversations with some of these retirees that were coming to the Poe. We said, we want to learn the language. That's why we're here too. We want to learn the language. And the good thing about working at the Poe was there was a lot of neighboring villages that were taking the arts at the Poe Center. And so we were like learning each other's language. How do you say this in your language versus my language? And crossing over to learn to understand the language itself, and the pronunciation is very important. But yeah, I found that very interesting with the retirees coming back from the city and not only interested in the art, but the language itself. They wanted to learn the language again. And so that was great to hear that. They had a lot of great stories to tell about living in the city and then coming back and forth, being displaced and not really connected. And I think that's how a lot of the generations who are wanting to learn that language feel. They don't feel connected. They feel apart. So slowly getting them to learn the language and have that connection into the true meaning of who you are and where you come from is very important. Not just the language itself, but participating within the tradition of dancings and community that has a lot of events that happens on the calendar year. Every day there's something happening within a Native community. For Native people, if you belong to, say, I belong to Ohkay Owingeh, something was happened, I have to be there. I have to be part of it, because that's who you are and where you come from. And with a lot of the family members, when COVID hit, those who had uncles, aunties that belonged to certain societies couldn't participate like we used to because of COVID. They were the only ones. So the door was closed. So we couldn't be part of that anymore. Just like dances where the whole community would come together. When you're in the realm and in front of all your elders, let alone the singers, the enunciation of the word within a song has strong meaning, but also learning to understand what that word means that they're singing about. Place, sky, ground, animals, you, ancestors, the name, connecting, is very important, and it can go on and on, but if it gets lost, it's lost. So just like any other culture out there is trying to regain identity itself, and then again getting back to pottery in a way, we're all connected in one way or another to clay. Like I always tell my students in the academia world, within my pottery class, but how has your culture used clay? Whether it's medicinal purposes, body paint, making a home out of clay, tiles, stoves, urns, how has your culture used clay? That connection is there. For me, with non-native students within my classes, we have a great library, a research area. Let's do some research on your cultural background and bring back something into the class and try and bring back something into your culture, just like Native people. Hopefully that can happen, whether it be in the family or the community. With Native people, it's always a need for pottery, or let alone maybe a grandma, auntie, or cousin used to do pottery, but it's no longer being seen within that family, or let alone the community. So they come looking for potters like us that are willing to share that knowledge and technique of doing what we do. I'm always open to that. But make it your own. Make it your own. I'll teach you if you're from another pueblo with my material, but learn how to make your piece from your area with your materials, so you call it your piece from your home. And sometimes I get invited to go to other pueblos to teach, but the elders will always talk to me first. They want to know who I am, where I come from, what I have to bring to certain people that want to learn. And that's great. I get to know who they are, they get to know who I am, and cross over and learn to understand each other, even though we're miles apart. But, language again falls into the realm of who you are and where you come from and what you have to offer to them. It's always there. Language is always there. And being recognized by those individuals who actually seek you out to help things and make things happen is very rewarding, for me as a potter as well. But, we all have something in common, with clay. It's all there. I'll teach you techniques and how to make things, but you do the rest. Do some homework.
Yeah, that aspect of learning the skills to make a pot, but then combining it with the knowledge to find the clay where you're from, where your ancestors and your elders have gotten that clay. That's that connection to that place. And then when you combine it with the language, it really makes it more of a full picture of what it was like to live in those times before colonization. And something you mentioned is the link between language loss or language vitality and sovereignty. And a lot of times, sovereignty is a word we use all the time in Native communities. And I feel like sometimes we lose the piece of culture and language being a crucial part to that. So sovereignty, in my mind, is the ability for Native communities to make decisions for themselves, not just to say we're sovereign, but really to make decisions based on their traditional values and their culture and what informs those decisions. You can be sovereign and make decisions like a Western person would, but over time you're going to start to lose who you are as a community, as a person. But if you keep those aspects strong, that sovereignty is going to be rooted in what the ancestors have passed on, but not just passed on, but also fought to pass on. And somebody I saw on the way in here is Tessie Naranjo from Santa Clara Pueblo. And, when I think of the people before us doing what they had to do to pass things on, I think of our elders today putting in the work. And Clarence and Tessie are two of those individuals. Tessie, for me, being language, her and some family members got together and put this really super priceless resource together that we use in our language department. And it's helped us to, what it is it's a textbook on Tewa pronouns and verbs. And when I was starting to get into language work, I could not make out what it was doing at all. And it took me a while to finally piece together what the book is doing. And I was lucky enough to go to graduate school and learn this method for revitalizing language through immersion. And taking that method and this resource, along with all the other things, the other tools I have, we're able to really accelerate what the work we're doing to learn the language, learn how it functions, learn what's important about it. And yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Tessie because, she's putting in that work as an elder to ensure that the language is passed on. And we're trying to take that and really put it to use, not just let it sit there. There's a lot of, the Western way of thinking is you write something down, like that's knowledge. You have a shelf of books, like that's knowledge, it's up there. You read the books, you get the knowledge, and then so on. But really, like, language is something you can't just write down and it's saved. It's not protected just because it's written down. You have to take it and put it in your head and use it. And so that's what we're trying to do. And that resource has been really a game changer for us. Once we figured out how to use it, because Tewa is not like English at all. And so, I can really understand and see that transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. And it might look different. Back in the day, our people didn't write anything down. But that's what we have to do. We have to adapt. And so we have to adapt, but we also have to do it on our terms. We're not just trying to make Tewa into a written language. We really want to keep it an oral-based language. And that's something we have to think about all the time is like, what decision do we make? And oftentimes we don't agree within the community of how to move forward on things. But at some point, we decide that this is the best way to move forward with it. And we do our best with what that is. Something else you had mentioned is dances and the words within the songs. I went to a couple of dances this past Sunday, and one of them was at Ohkay Owingeh, and there they had around 270 buffalo dancers, and it was, very much a sight to behold. And being there, it's not just impressive because of the numbers, it's impressive because we're just coming out of COVID, and a lot has happened within the Native communities, but you see this very strong presence of people from the community coming together because they want and they feel like they need to be there for this to happen. Like Matt was saying of, when something's happening in the Pueblo, we try our best to be there for it because we shouldn't be there just to take, we should be there to give and to ensure that our sovereignty is protected through that. And so I was there watching this buffalo dance, and as the line, you go towards the back of the line, it gets younger and younger, and then you start to see these little kids who can barely wear their regalia, and it's hot, and all of this stuff, but they're out there and they're doing it. And what was really cool is I was standing in this one area, and the line was so long that you could only faintly hear the drummers and the singers. But we're standing there, and there's this cloud of dust coming up. It's like bison coming through. And you can hear just the connection between the people and the ground. You can just hear them shuffling on the dirt. And it sounded so cool. And you can hear their regalia moving around. And, it was very tangible in that way of that connection. And then in contrast to that, I also went to Santa Clara Pueblo that day and saw a bow and arrow dance. And that one was very small and intimate. And that one, the men who were dancing were singing, and I could hear the Tewa words they were saying. And like Matt was saying, it all had to do with the directions, with moisture, with the mountains. And, when you put all of those things together, it's just like, there's nothing that is comparable to it. You have the words, you have the people singing the words, you have the regalia reflective of what they're singing, what's important to us. And, that's a cycle that we want to continue for many reasons. But sovereignty is, a big piece of that. The federal government has this list of guidelines that they go by to federally recognize tribes. And one of those things they use is that you have a distinct culture and a language. And so, we shouldn't be doing stuff just because the US government wants us to do it or because of that, this or that. But it is, that is an important piece of ensuring that we protect our land and we protect our people and our ability to make decisions for ourselves. So I just wanted to make that connection to some of the things you were saying.
Well, thank you. One more thing, when I was doing my MFA at UNM, my thesis was based on 5 different sites of Ohkay Owingeh, the ancestral pottery and sites, in the hopes of using the pottery and the material from where they came from and the material that was being collected to connect back to place and space and ownership of a particular tribe, which would be Ohkay Owingeh. Because just like the material, just like us, we hold DNA. Just like the clay from where it was being made, the shuyan, the temper, the ping, the clay, the paint, the wood that was being fired there. And as you move to another place, it's another place with different material. And then another place, So that was my hopes, was to connect ownership of tribal land of Ohkay Owingeh to place and space through this materials that were being gathered and made, different pots from the 5 different sites of Ohkay Owingeh. And, that was my hopes, to use that in that way, reconnecting to place from Ohkay Owingeh. And the hopes of regaining back some of those places, and I hope it does, move forward and can be used. But again, too, it speaks its own language itself of place and material itself.
I think now's a good time to transition to the pottery demo. I can make a pinch pot and then that's the end.
That's it. Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you all came today. It's a good crowd. Who wants to make this pot? Okay. Well, the material I'm going to be using today is micaceous. It's mica clay. It comes from the north, from the Rito area. When we go gather clay, it's not just about taking, it's about asking. It's about asking Pinkwheel, can I come and gather material? Can you be part of my journey? So, I like to describe it as, your child being born. What do you do to your child when your child is born? You wash the newborn, you bring it home, and you lay her out in a comfortable place. So too with Pinkwheel, when we gather, we always, state our business and our intentions with the clay itself, asking it with respect that we can gather, and also for her to be part of our journey through it all. And the same thing when we get her cleaned and we lay her down to get to this part for building Pinkwheel, Clay Woman. So I'm going to start out with, maybe I should pour some water in here. The fish like to jump a lot in this one, especially when I'm wedging. So usually before we start, as traditional potters, we blow into the clay itself. We give it our spirit. Then we just, in our own way, ask Pinkwheel to be part of our journey and our creation is within a Tewa way. It says, Pinkwheel no owe, didn't sige me. Natupai mo. Kaya mo. Ohkay Owingeh mo. Dili na me. Clay Woman, I stand before you and ask your permission to be part of my journey today, to be creating. I'm a Tewa potter from Ohkay Owingeh. So when you wedge the clay, it's very important. I do anywhere from 25 to 30 rounds of wedging so that we can take the air pockets out of the, excuse me, out of the, out of the clay itself. And I like to pounce it on here so that the clay particles align. They're stacked on top of each other's, just like flagstone. They're all flat. So if you look at clay under a microscope, you're going to see them flat. So that's what we want to have, is the particles flat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start out with patting it back and forth, making a ball. So I'm going to use this part here, not the fingers, this part here. I'm going to start from the middle and work my way out. It's just like, how many of you work with pinch pots, doing pinch pots? It's the same method, but you're pounding on the clay, right? You're not doing this. So as you're pinching, you're moving up, right? So as you're pounding, you're moving out. So you're not thinning so much here. You're stretching the clay out. Okay? So very important to always clean your hands so that you're not getting too much of the dry stuff in the clay, because wet clay forms around the dry stuff. You get it in the clay, you create a what? A void, air pocket. So again, I'm just going to do this, hit here, okay? Now moving out towards the rim, the lip. So we have that, okay? So now I'm going to flatten it out, okay? So this part here will be here. I'm no longer focusing here, I'm focusing around here, okay? So depending on the size of cookie or bowl that you might be using, your patty should be at least 1 inch or 2 inches past that cookie, depending on the depth of the cylinder that you might be using. Because what? You're going to push it down and then you're going to lose height, right? So you want enough to be up here so that you can connect your coils, right? We hope. So we got that. So we're going to take it here and set it on there. Okay? So what I like to do is I like to put my finger under here, close to the edge of the pookie, and then kind of visualize where my thumb is underneath, sitting on there. And then I'll just turn and score to get an idea where the patty is sitting so I can readjust it. Okay? If it's too much on one side, you just readjust. And so now I'm going to lift the lip up, the patty up. I'm not going to push down, I'm just going to lift up. Okay? So right now, it's a little high on one side, so I'm just going to lift her up and readjust her, relocate. Okay. So now I'm here. Now visualize a potter throwing on a wheel. For a potter throwing on a wheel, they're wedging on a wheel, right? They're pushing, pulling, whereas as a potter hand building, we're physically wedging on a flat surface, this, right? On a wheel, they're doing this, pulling, but we're physically engaging. But just remember the cylinder. The potter on the wheel will do a cylinder. When he or she decides that cylinder is high enough, then they're swaying and dancing with the centrifugal force of the wheel turning, right? But we also will do a cylinder but more so engaging with the clay, not dancing this way, but physically engaging. Excuse me. I would drink that. But so now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hands, I'm going to wrap it here, and push the clay into itself, taking control and creating a cylinder. Okay? So now, once I've gotten that, I'm going to use the tips of my fingers here. I'm going to bring the lip this way and press down slowly to get rid of the air underneath. If you don't do that, you're going to have this hump. Okay? So gently. I kind of work fast. All right? So we got that. Don't worry about the cosmetics. We'll take care of that as we're working. Okay? Focus on getting it done. All right? So right now you see all this wrinkling happening on the inside and outside. Always working with the hands first before you work with tools. That's my goal. So we're going to brace the wall on the outside, putting your hand, this part here on the pookie here, brace it, and then just smoothing out those wrinkles. Wish it was that easy for me. Yeah. Sorry. Now I'm going to go on the outside doing the same. Bracing with my hand on the inside. Okay. So we got that. Now I'm going to take some clay. I'm going to roll coil. And I'll palm it back and forth into a ball. Doing this back and forth, stretching the clay.
When you have a chance, can you talk a little bit about how you acquired this knowledge to make pottery?
Well, years of dedication, being mentored. One of my greatest mentors and always will be remembered is Mary Louise Garcia, the daughter of the matriarch Lucy Lewis from Acoma, Pueblo. She was teaching a class at UNM when I was an undergrad. So I was already, working with natural clays. My professor, Bill Gilbert, who's now retired, I told him one semester on the wheel, then the rest hand building. And so we did that, and I ran into Mary Lewis. And so I started working and talking to her, visiting her, going to Acoma, stuff like that. And then my aunties, my sisters, and other potters. And but she was the most, one of the most individuals that I loved working with and understood what pottery was really like. And when she fell ill, she was still teaching, not knowing that she was partially paralyzed. Professor Gilbert asked me to go visit her at the hospital at a rehab of Martin Luther King. And didn't know why. And she told me that I was to step into her shoes from that day forward, take over her class. And as an undergrad, graduates in like an undergrad. But that wasn't my problem, Go talk to Professor Gilbert. Leave me alone. But, it was through her also. And so because of that, I've been there teaching her class as an undergrad. And then after I got my BFA, I continued teaching. And then after adjunct 4 and 5, they told me that I needed to get my MFA to continue doing what I was doing. But then they wanted me to go somewhere else. I said, oh no, okay. But it took 3 tries to get into the program, knowing that they wanted me to do this, And I said, no, I ain't going anywhere. You have one hell of a program. I'm going to stay. We're paying a mortgage. Our kids are going to school, and we're paying for their education. I had like 4 jobs. Okay. But yeah, it was because of Mary and other potters, my aunties, my sisters, that, took me under their wing and showed me pottery making and learning to understand and appreciate material and what it means to be a potter and not just take, always ask, state your intentions. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking, I rolled out a coil, as you saw. I'm taking this coil, I'm putting it halfway in and halfway out. So in order to understand what I mean, I'll show you. So I'm putting the coil like this in the pot. Okay? So it's halfway up, halfway down. So now what I'm going to do is gently press this coil onto the outside wall so that it's sticking and adhering and not falling in. Once I've done that, I'm going to divide the coil in half, imaginary, and then bring that down like that, all the way around. And after I do that, I'm going to pinch this part here. You always have that seam. Not just now, but always as you're building. And then I'm going to press it inward so that you're closing that. And after that, I'm going to come down. And then this way. And then not up, I'm going to come down this way. And then the pinching starts. So the most important part about pinching, once you get going and you put your first coil and you build your wall, your structure, meaning the cylinder, each coil you put on from the very beginning of the start will be the same all the way through your building. Now, when we start pinching, if you go around once and move up, then that should be your goal. Round once, up, round once, up, round once, up. So you want consistency and thickness in your walls. You don't go twice and then one and then twice and then one. You're going to have inconsistency in thickness, okay? So in order to remember where you need to stop, just put a little clay ball on the outside. So that will be your red light, right? Where you stop and move up, okay? So now I'm going to do what I just showed you, okay? I'm moving the clay down, half of the coil, downward. And now I'm going to close this seam here. Now I'm going to go down, okay? Always using and bracing. I'm going at an angle in the same manner that I would do with the tools, but always starting with your hands first, then smoothing at an angle upward versus down, then sweeping all the way from the center all the way to the edge. Now here, I'm going to come down. Just dancing. Okay. Now I'm coming down. Now I'm going to start pinching. Okay? Pinching is very important. When I teach native students and non-native students, I always start with a pinch pot. for each class. So you're learning to understand the strength you have in these fingers, okay, and then also the plasticity of the clay. How strong and how hard you pinch is how the clay will start moving upward. Okay, pinching, very important. Don't pinch your neighbor. Okay, all right. So when we first start, we're going to pinch from the edge of the puki. Okay, always don't work here. Always work in front. You want to see what you're doing. Okay. So right now, it's not about worrying about the cosmetics of the pot. It's about building a pot at this point. We'll worry about that when we get there. So if it's kind of bulging out, just put your hand in here and pedal. And if it starts going out like that, take control. Okay, put your hands over, push the clay into itself, just like an accordion. Push it into itself. Take control. Even if you're way up here and it's going out on you, take control. Okay, I get that way when I eat. I get out of control. All right, sorry. So here we are. That's one coil. Okay. Now we're gonna do another coil. My timekeeper. How are we?
You're good.
Good. Okay.
I wanted to ask how many students do you think you've taught?
God, a lot. Thousands. Yeah. A lot of my students who I've mentored, natives and non-natives, are really doing well. I see them at shows. They come and say hello, or they bring me a little gift, you know, a little thank you. One of the most recent students of mine, I don't know, maybe you've seen him in Indian Market or other shows. His name is Jared So. He's a Dene potter. He was one of my students also. And just like all the other students, like I was told, always mention those who taught you to do what you're doing because you just didn't learn yourself. Give them that honor, which I always do. I always mention those who taught me. I just didn't happen. So rolling out the coil again, not too hard or else you'll flatten it. So rolling with here, okay? Rolling outward, in, and then back and forth. Wet your hands just a bit so that it doesn't stick. And the most important part about doing coils is that, when you roll out a coil, cut the ends because you usually have these happening, okay? And if you push these two together, you're gonna have an air pocket, okay? And we don't want that. So another important thing about pottery making is that when you're hand building is putting the two coils together. You really have to push them together. Not just gently touch them, but push them together. And then smooth them out. So again, what am I going to do with the coil? Halfway in, halfway out. Right. Okay, so we're going to do that here. Halfway in, halfway out. And with the coils, you want to come at least an inch to half an inch over the other coil. Cut. Because when you push the two coils together, you're gonna lose length again, okay? So it's always good to cross over at least an inch to two, then smooth those, return it back, and then gently adhere it, and then the same technique from the very beginning of the first coil that's being laid onto the wall, you should do that always. Don't revert to another way of doing it, or else you'll see it in your work, okay? Now again, sweeping upward at an angle. Now this one.
It's impressive to watch Clarence make a pot, but it's also a little frustrating because he makes it look so easy, and then when you sit down, it's like.
And then coming down just a little lower where the coil was added, okay? And then moving upward. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my fingers just like I would use a tool and smooth out all the overlapping at an angle. And the thing is, we're not gonna worry about the inside right now. We're gonna worry about the outside now, okay? Inside later, outside first. Always clean your tools. You spent more time trying to clean your tools. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this serrated tool. It's a rib, steel rib, but you could also make them out of wood or gourd, just cutting at angles to have teeth. I love to use this because it helps breaks out some of the bubbles that might be there, and also helps you bind the two coils together, or all the coils that you'll be adding. So the most important part when you start using the tools to build up is coming at the edge here. Okay. Now, when you're building, you don't want the clay body sitting out here because you're going to have this happening. Okay. You want to even with the inside of the cylinder. In this case, the puki. Okay. So you want to see a little daylight. So I'm taking little baby steps, bracing the clay wall with my hands on the inside. I'm not pushing, I'm just allowing it to sit against and following the tool and giving it a little daylight between the puki and the clay body. Now I'm going to start moving upward at an angle. Moving up. Up at an angle. Straight. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to use another tool which is flexible. I'm going to use it the same way I started with this. Okay. Cut your fingernails, you can't pick up anything. Okay. Now we'll come straight up. Smooth out and catch some of the overlapping clay with the two. Okay. Now we have that. Now we're with the inside. Now with the inside, what we're going to do before we actually start using the serrated 2, the one with the teeth, I'm going to make a little round ball of clay. I'm going to check for thickness. Again, we're always being a potter, native potter, always thinking in the cardinal direction, center being you in the middle of the pot. So we're going to do the cardinal direction, center being you, and the center will be checked first. So take a little clay ball, make a little round ball, don't hold it, set it on a flat surface, put the needle tool in there, start at the center, push down, that's your thickness. And then you'll check the other 4 directions for thickness as well. Okay? Awesome, huh? Always put the needle tool in a different hole. Okay? Not the same one, all right? Okay. Always check for thickness first before you start working on the inside, because you might take more clay away, then you'll end up patching, okay? But it's good to patch during this state. After it's dry, forget it. It may just, the clay will dry and just peel off. So now I'm going to use the serrated 2. I'm going to come at an angle, okay? Not this way, because think of a shovel. When you have a shovel, you dig into the earth, you pull out a big chunk, right? Same thing with the tool. You want to lay at an angle. What we're going to be doing is compressing the clay to suit the bottom of the puki or the cylinder that you might be using. Now, if you're using a ceramic cylinder, you need to align it with plastic or a cloth so you'll be able to take it out, or else it'll stick to the cylinder. You won't have a pot, okay? So we're going to go to angle with your 2 just a bit. I'm going to lay it flat and come at an angle, okay? Supporting the outside wall at the same time. Aye. Okay. We can always go over. Here. Okay. Now I'm coming up just a little more. Now if you're using your tool and you're coming about here, you're just going to cut the whole thing off, then you have a small little bowl. So you want to put your tool about here. Okay? So that's what I'm going to be doing, moving upward, bracing from the outside. Okay? Now moving up. We got that. Okay. Now we're going to use a different rib. This one's a wood rib. Okay, I'm going to use it in the same manner as well. Okay, at an angle, compressing, moving up, moving up, moving up, coming around the edge. Now, clean my tool. Now I'm just going to take from the center all the way up, but bracing.
When you went to UNM, did you already have it in mind that you wanted to do pottery?
Well, I was doing pottery before, learning, but for me, our potters weren't around anymore in my family. They were all gone. All the potters were gone. And the only one that was doing pottery in the family was Bernadette, my sister, Bernadette Owingeh. And Joan is her sister, who is a cook at Santa Clara, at the senior center. And so they did pottery, but there was no pottery. But I wanted to do it in order to preserve pottery making, not only within the family, but also within the community itself, where it's always needed, you know, for everyday life as well. but also for those who go on their journey as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a roundness now. Oops. Create a roundness. I'm going to start here, but also using my hand at the same time because you have this awesome little void here. And you begin to shape. I'm going at an angle here. And just allowing this part to sit right here on the rim. To do that. Okay, now I'm going all the way down, sweeping at an angle upward. Okay. Now, I'm just going to go all the way up. All the way up. You okay? Net mount. Okay. So, I sat here, give her this. In Tewa. So now what I'm going to do here is, gosh, okay. I'm going to take this. Now, we just round this rag off into a little ball. So since I smoothed the inside, I don't want to poke it. I want to use this embrace in the inside. I'm going to smooth and just follow with that tool, with that cloth rolled up and start shaping on the outside. Throw your cock away. So now I'm going to smooth the inside, get all the tool marks off. Okay. Then I'll use this one here to really finish. Okay. Now I'm going to use my fingers like this, like a J. Okay. I'm going to hold it underneath the rim here, like this. I'm going to use this tool here and slowly tap. Now I'm going this way to form this in this space here. Creating a neck. I'll take this, smooth it out. Okay. Now, what I'll do is I'll cut. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut here. I'm going to brace my arm against my rib cage, and I'm not going to dig in it. I'm just going to trace, scratch the neck. We'll look for the lowest point where we will cut, and I'm just going to place it straight and turn. Scratch the surface first, so hopefully we come out the same place. And then at an angle so that we're cutting it off. We're not forcing the tool, we're allowing the tool to actually dig in itself. Okay.
So his arm is rigid and it's on his rib cage, and he's just keeping it super still and turning it in a circle.
Okay, there we are. Okay, now we're gonna take this other two here and we're gonna pick this tears of clay up. I always like to think of this part as, buttering my toast. Okay. So you're gonna take this tool at an angle and pick off the other tears. Okay. Now I'm gonna take my finger here. I'm gonna run it across here, but also holding it, the rim like this with my two fingers. The reason why I do this, that I really like the students or anyone I teach, is that because when you cut, you might have little tears on the rim so that you're sealing it. Next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take these two fingers. I like to put this little finger here so that you can correct the opening itself. Okay, so we have that. Now I'll just take either a cloth or a chamois or a plastic or a sponge and just saddle it like this and just bevel the edge. So we have that, or you might just want to do this.
Just similar to this part here.
Okay. And there we are.
Now's a good time for Q&A.
Yeah.
So we'd like to now transition over to Q&A. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand.
Clarence, why did you use the wooden rib on the inside and the metal rib on the outside?
Good question. Well, I used, which one were you talking about? The one with the teeth or the straight edge?
A straight edge, not straight.
Well, this one is flexible,
Yeah.
and I like to use this because it catches the overlapping of clay easily, whereas this one, you actually be indenting. Okay? So this one is made for smoothing on the inside or the rim itself, the neck or the rim. So I prefer this.
How difficult is it to get the consistency of the clay just right?
Years of practice. Well, trial and error when you begin starting out, but the thing is this, the pinching. And again, remembering how many times you go around when you first start so that you're having that consistency and thickness. Pinch yourself and see how hard you're pinching so that you're giving that same pressure of pinch to the clay itself. So the harder you pinch, the more it will stretch. It becomes thinner. So again, too, remembering what the purpose of the pot is going to be doing, or what you're going to be doing to the pot as far as decorating. If you're going to be carving, it should be thicker because you're subtracting clay around. You don't want to go through the pot and becomes a holy pot. Okay? And if you're incising, doing sgraffito, maybe a 1/4 inch. Or when you're going to just be polishing and painting, a 1/4 inch. But then you have to handle with care while you're doing that because it's still fragile at that state because it hasn't been fired. So another thing about doing traditional pottery is that it's not like ceramics where you bitch, you take it out, and then you gotta do your painting, then you do it again, and then if you want to do another thing, then you got to do it again. Fire, that's too much, So with traditional pottery, you do it only one time. Everything is done only once, and then the fire. Yes.
So, you teach at UNM and you also make your own pots. What kind of schedule do you have for making your own pots?
It's not flexible. I try and find time. I call it my me time. Okay. I work in a basement in my home. I have no windows, and I'm happy with that because I have no conception of time, whether it's getting late or what. Sometimes my wife at 2, 3 in the morning, she's probably checking to see if I'm late there. Do you know what time it is? And you're going where? Oh, it's 3 or 4. I said, oh, okay, I guess I have to quit. But I try to make time for myself when I can. And particularly when I'm teaching, I'll try and do demos, a lot because I need to go through the whole step with my students in sanding, water washing, slipping, polishing, painting, or carving, so they get the full round of what needs to happen to that pot.
I was gonna mention there's this film that I created for Clarence of him going through the process of making the pot. This was a part of his loose fellowship. I'm not sure, do people purchase a copy of it or?
If they love, yeah, they can.
Yeah, it's a good, what he just did right now is obviously amazing. This gives you a little bit more of the before and after as well.
Could you speak a little bit to the firing process?
Okay,
Pots, small pots, right?
Oh, okay. Well, there's 3 types of firing that I usually do. I have the open firing, which is the pit firing, where the fuel goes directly on top of the pieces, which is more intense. So preheating for any of the outside firings, whether it's the pit, the oxidation, or the reduction, preheating is the most important part of firing because you want them to be the same consistency and hotness as the flame before you start actually bombarding it with the fuel. So preheating is most important. The pit, the open firing is where it's preheated. I do like the pots are sitting right next to the pit or in the middle. If they're sitting in the middle, you don't have to turn it, but if they're sitting on the outside, you're turning clockwise a quarter turn 4 times, 10 to 15 minutes. And then they're put in and the fuel is put on gently and you allow it to preheat again and really bisque for another 20 minutes. And after that, then you put all the fuel on. And with the oxidation firing, they're shielded, but they're also preheated in the same way. And a reduction firing is, what I like to use is 50-50, powdered horse manure and sawdust. Or sometimes if you don't have the manure, powdered dried horse manure, then it's just sawdust into the container. After all the preheating has been done, and then put it in there, cover the lid, let it really ignite inside. It will ignite because it needs oxygen. It won't completely burn. It will cut itself off and smother. Then that's when the fuel goes on the outside. And as it's burning, it really heats it up and it starts burning slowly inside with a bigger flame. So that reduction is black. Okay? So anything you put in reduction will be black. If you're looking for a clean firing, oxidation, the true color, the slips, the clean body, or the paint, put in reduction, I'm sorry, you'll have a matte on black. Just like a Santa Clara San Alfonso matte on black pot, that's what you get. Okay, now if you were in my class and you did that, retake.
She had also asked about fire clouds.
Oh, fire clouds are where the wood, the fuel is put against the piece, and we call them kisses. Yeah, so that's how that's created. It's not going and painting it. It's the fuel and the flames that are actually touching the piece. That's what gives it the fire cloud.
How do you store the flames?
say you know, you're not gonna do any pottery for 5 days, but you've already collected clay. So how do you store it?
After you clean it,
Yeah.
After you
How
clean it?
long can you use it and where do you store it?
well, it's all about the bag. Yeah, and if you're finding it's a little stiff, then just damp a bag with water and throw it in there and close it. For me, when I get new clay, I number my bags so I can work with the oldest first, then I work with the newer last. It's just like marriage, you know, you have to, you know, get to know each other. It's just like clay itself. Way back there, in the black.
Oh, I was wondering if you had ever taught Adobe workshops, because I feel like in our communities, the language of clay and pottery making and Adobe making are very synonymous, or they relate to each other a lot, and I'm having a hard time in my own work in bridging those two together when I'm working in Pueblo communities, I guess, and talking about clay and Adobes and clay and pottery. I feel like I'm somehow having a hard time bridging the two, I guess.
Well, you know, in clay, in making pottery, you add temper. Okay? In adobes, you're adding straw. Okay, but you're making the solid bricks. But it's all the same material, but different form and function. Function within the pottery is to cook or serve or hold water. In a home, adobe, you're making a home out of adobe, it's housing someone. You know, but the materials is the same, but adding different elements to it to make the adobe happen, to make the pot happen. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah,
No?
I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Okay, sounds good, right?
And I'd be interested in hearing that conversation because I'm also wanting to learn about adobe making and that's been, and I feel like it's really just a difference of scale and function, but you know, it's clay and sand, it's clay and temper and straw, and bringing those, you know, connecting with the land on which you are on and creating something that's useful for you and your community. But that's the last question we can take. Thank you so much for coming today.
I'd like to thank you for coming this afternoon. My name is Marita Hines. I'm the Director of Education here at MIAC. I'd like to thank Clarence and Sam here and everybody from SAR. Good morning. And our next lecture conversation will be next Friday, April 21st. So please come for that. While you're here, I encourage you to visit the Granite and Clay exhibit. It's up until May 29th. So then after that, it's going to the Met and the Villarreal Foundation in New York City. So see it while it's here. Thank you again for coming.